Welcome back to my economics course. This is Dr. Kling. I'm going to continue now with the discussion of the issue of outsourcing, and now talk about outsourcing offshore. So what I've been saying is that outsourcing is economic activity, and that economic progress consists of more and more outsourcing. So I associate the concept of outsourcing with a more complex economy and a more prosperous economy. It's the trading in the market is the best way to take advantage of comparative advantage, to do what you're best at, to do what you can do that's most valuable, focus on that, and then get all sorts of goods back from the market in return, because we can get many more things from the market than we can possibly make for ourselves. So let's say someone says, oh no, I really believe in buying local. I'm going to put a big question mark next to that, because I always say to them, yes, I agree, you should buy local. In fact, you shouldn't consume anything that you can't make for yourself. And at that point they pause and give me a strange look, because it's pretty obvious they could hardly have anything that they currently consume if they had to make it themselves. The simplest things around your house you could not make. There's a video on the internet somewhere of somebody trying to make a toaster. In fact, let me try to find that one. Alright, that wasn't too hard. Turns out there's something called the Toaster Project where this fellow was been trying to build a toaster from scratch. And it's a really complex story. He needs materials from all over the world. He needs to come up with mechanisms to smelt iron ore, to do all sorts of electronics. It's really difficult, and I'm sure the same would be true for even simpler objects around the house. They'd be very difficult for you to make for yourself. So if you're going to live any kind of modern life, it's pretty inevitable that you're going to be doing some outsourcing. So buying local just it really is not feasible. So then of course the other thing, you're not just trading with other people currently. Remember I talked about outsourcing in some ways as you're outsourcing to other workers, and you also outsource in a way indirectly by using capital. So if you use capital, then you've in some sense outsourced to the workers who provided the capital. For example, the builders who built the washing machine. In some sense, when you use your washing machine to do laundry, you've outsourced to those workers. Okay, so we really can't buy local. We often outsource to other workers, and we often outsource via capital to other workers. All those things make our economy more complex. So let's think about sort of the winners and losers from outsourcing. Okay, so you have a buyer, that's you doing the outsourcing, and a seller, that's the person who's outsourcing to you. And then you have let's say a competitor or a potential competitor. And the competitor who loses out. So this is somebody who you would have outsourced to, but now you outsource to somebody else. So the buyer and the seller, well, they're clearly both happy about the outsourcing. So they're happy about your trading or outsourcing. Outsourcing is also just trading. The competitor, not so much. competitor would rather the transaction between you and the seller not take place so that you have to go to the competitor. That's what the competitor wants to do. Now, in most transactions, most of the time you just make the decision that's most efficient for you. So if the competitor is a coin laundromat and you would rather use your own washing machine, you just use your own washing machine. Or if you'd rather take it to somebody who folds laundry, you do that. So most of the time you make the choice, the buyer makes the choice that's best for the buyer. And the only reason we know that the seller is happy is that the seller agreed to make the deal. If the seller thought they were going to lose money on the deal, then they wouldn't make the deal. So we know the seller's happy because they make the deal, and the buyer is presumably happy because they've chosen it over all the possible things that a competitor might offer. But the competitor often is not happy, and competitors find lots of ways to try to complain, to try to get the transaction between the most efficient buyer and the seller banned. So the competitor wants that to be banned, or wants to talk you out of it. So tries to talk you out of it. Or get government to stop it. And most of the time the competitor can't really get away with that, because most of the time the buyer and the seller, their advantages are too obvious for somebody to put a stop to. But sometimes there's an ethnic or national border. So there's a boundary, and on one side is us, another side is them. Now, if the buyer and the seller are both us, so if the buyer and the seller are both us and the competitor is them, well then absolutely nothing will happen, because government isn't going to interfere with us in order to help out a foreign competitor. But when the buyer is us, the seller is them, the Chinese, the Indians, the Filipinos, and the competitor is us. When we get this configuration, the buyer is one of us, competitor is one of us, the seller is one of them. Well, the buyer would still like to do business with the seller, even though the seller is not one of us. But the competitor is now antagonistic to the deal. Antagonistic. And the seller has no political power. Okay, the Chinese don't vote here, so no political power. So if you want to know why offshore outsourcing is so controversial, so ordinary outsourcing happens all the time. People constantly substitute new technologies. They constantly change their sources of where they buy things. They constantly come up with new ways of outsourcing, taking new services that you didn't even have before. So we're constantly coming up with new ways to outsource. That's what entrepreneurs do all the time, is invent new ways to outsource. That's how entrepreneurs make money. But when we go offshore, we bring in this political configuration where the buyer is, the seller is no longer us. The seller is now them. and the competitor is now us, and that changes the equation politically. I don't think it changes the equation economically. Economically, you're still better off if the buyer and the seller can make the transaction. And I don't really think it changes the equation morally. I mean, you can maybe think about that and argue it, but it's not clear to me that someone who sells to us from India or China is somehow less deserving in a moral sense than a competitor from the U.S. And so but that's something that, again, you will hear the competitors try to make a moral case that it's somehow wrong to buy things from made by an Indian or a Chinese person. So I think that's all I'll say about offshore outsourcing for now. And next time I'll talk about some issues about how capital may or may not produce outsourcing. I'll talk about the voice response systems for telephones. That's it.